All right, hour number 2 on a Friday can mean only one thing. Chris Brown and Steve Tasker are joined by senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, whose weekly segment is presented by Scott Lawnyard, an official commercial site work partner of the Buffalo Bills. All right, Greg, looks like both teams are going to be a little short-handed at receiver. No Keon Coleman for Buffalo. Amari Cooper questionable. Colts are going to be without Michael Pittman Jr., who's been battling a back injury for weeks and has been relatively ineffective, at least as far as his standards go. How do you think that changes things, at least for Buffalo's offense?
You know, it's really interesting. It's funny you say that about watching Buffalo's offense because, you would expect that Buffalo's offense with Josh Allen at quarterback would really be kind of a downfield passing team, but they really haven't been this year. Allen has not really thrown the ball that much relative to the rest of the league, throws that are beyond 15 yards from the line of scrimmage, and they've not really been successful when they've done that. So it's really been somewhat of a condensed offense. We know the running game has been a big factor. That's certainly been a big factor in the red zone. Obviously, they're going to have to go down the list and bring up some other receivers. But I'm just curious, the way in which they played, I don't know if it changes a lot in terms of tactics, because they really have not been a push the ball down the field passing game. It's really been much more efficient, and I think that's based on game plan, play calling. Allen, I think, has been a little more conservative throwing the ball. He hasn't really pushed it down the field, even when there are times when it looks like there might be throws available.
It looks like we've talked about this for a couple of weeks now, Greg. The Bills coaching staff have made a philosophical choice, and I'm talking about both sides of the ball and as a whole staff. Offense is all in, and so is the defense, of shortening these games to they run the ball, on first down where they fewer possessions. They know they've got an offense, particularly with Josh, who's really efficient. I know they're not really high in the third down efficiency, but on fourth down, they're 100%. Right. Every time they go for it, they get it. So when they really need a first down, they feel like they can get it. And they've kind of just resigned them. They're scoring 30 points a game, 6 out of 9 games. I mean, so that's kind of their philosophy. And now their big plays come after the catch, which that hasn't been the case in years past. So it really seems like a philosophical shift that they're really having some success with.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I was watching their tape and I was saying to one of my guys on the matchup show here that, is this something that's coming from the coaching staff? Is this a defined approach that they're coaching? Because we know that Josh Allen, by his nature over most of his career, is an aggressive guy. That if he feels like there's a downfield throw to be made, he's going to take it. But you're not really seeing that, Steve, this year. I mean, when I sit and watch the tape, there are times I feel like, boy, that throw I think is there. And the Josh Allen of 2-3 years ago would definitely turn that loose. Whereas now, instead of taking that throw, he's throwing it, I don't want to say it's a check down, but he's taking the shorter throw and making it more of a sustaining type offense. I mean, obviously, we're looking at the Ray Davis touchdown from last week, which was a clear bust by the Dolphins defense. But, it's interesting because, clearly there is a change, whether it's philosophical or whether it's just Josh choosing to, play more of a sustaining kind of pass game, but they are not pushing the ball down the field.
With respect to Buffalo's run game, running up the middle is going to be supremely difficult against Stewart and Buckner. So what do you envision for them in running to the edges?
Well, it's another thing that's interesting you say that, because one of the things they've done really well with the run game is that sort of weak side zone away from the tight end straight to the formation. That's been kind of a staple run for them. They run it often out of 12 personnel. It's basically an inside run. It'll be interesting in this game if you almost go back to some of the things they did a year ago, where they did a lot of the pulling of the tackle, because they often like to do that, to over fronts, which the Colts play a lot of. That's where the front is shifted to the strength of the offensive formation, to the tight end side, and maybe go back to pulling, the tackle, and then trying to attack a little more on the perimeter, and giving Cook and Davis sort of the, let them decide where they want to make their cut and cut downhill. So you could go back to that, Brownie. That's something they did really well a year ago.
The other thing that they're using more than anybody else is that sixth offensive lineman again. It's Alec Anderson this year, and they're averaging 5 yards a pop with it. It's hard to knock it when it's been working. And then I'm sure you saw last week there were a couple of plays in the red zone in particular where they went 3 tight ends and Alec Anderson at the same time down there. I'm not saying they go that far, but what do you make? I mean, they're using it 15% of their offensive snaps, 6 offensive linemen, and it's been productive.
Yeah, they played 81 snaps with a 6 linemen. That's a lot of snaps, far and away the most in the league. I think 30 or so more than the next team. And and again, given the injuries this week, but even without the injuries, they've only played 11 personnel at a little more than 50% of their offensive snaps, which, is not necessarily what teams do in the league. Although it's interesting, I think there's been a little bit of a trend, teams playing more with 12 personnel, 2 tight ends throughout the league. But you're right. They play a lot with 6 offensive linemen. You could well see that. But you make a great point about the team they're playing this week, that Colts D with Buckner and Stewart inside. That's not an easy place to run. So, we mentioned the other run that I mentioned about getting on the perimeter. We'll see what they do. I would think they'd stay with what they've been doing, which is kind of the sustaining pass game and the run game. I don't really think you'll see a change in how they approach their offense.
One of the things I thought might be different this time, Greg, and you're right, you're going to run your offense, right? I mean, you got to. That's the only one you've got. But I think without Cooper, perhaps maybe without Cooper, who's questionable, and of course Coleman, maybe the personnel packages do change, and they run those plays with different people on the field.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Everybody thinks they're going to try something wildly outlandish, but you're not of that mind, right? You think they're going to run the plays that they've run and just run them against the Colts defense.
I mean, again, you never know. I mean, there could be a couple of plays, tweaks to things. Teams often do that, obviously, if they're missing their personnel or against a specific defense that they feel it can work. But I don't know, Steve. You played usually by week 10. You're not changing anything dramatically, are you? I mean, you're not really doing that. I mean, look. Certainly, you could line up Kincaid as a wide receiver, which they do, so he can fill that role if they feel that they want to do what they would do with, Cooper or Coleman. He could probably line up and do those things. But I don't think you're going to see a completely different offense. I mean, you made a great point. They score 30 points a game. It's not like they're struggling to score. Now, there have been some games where they've not gotten off to a good start, but for the most part, this team does end up moving the ball. They don't get necessarily stuck. So I can't see them being dramatically different in how they approach the game.
Right.
All right, looking at their defense, setting the edge in the run front was a problem last week against Miami. Probably substandard performance for them against the run, all things considered. Jonathan Taylor is the task this week, but logic would say their run game of the Colts might have a shorter menu to worry about with Flacco in the game as opposed to Richardson. So how much easier does that make it for the Bills' run defense?
Well, and plus it's a totally different run game than the Dolphins. We know with the Dolphins, with their speed, they work the edges. I mean, they do that against everybody. And I'm not saying that means it's okay not to set the edge, but you're dealing with a different kind of run game when you play the Dolphins. The Colts run game, you're 100% right. It's a little more conventional, and certainly with Flacco at quarterback, he's going to either be in the gun or under center. It's going to be pretty straightforward. You don't have to worry about playing the quarterback, so you're not losing a defender in the run game because of the quarterback run game element. So this is a little different run game. Not that they won't toss it every once in a while, but they'll run mostly inside. It's mostly those kinds of runs. This is a totally different run game. And I think that the linebackers become really important. I think, it'll be Bernard and Williams playing inside, stacked backers. I think those guys become really important. They've got to release double teams. They've got to play downhill, but they've got to play with sort of some discipline downhill. You don't just fly downhill, but they've got to release double teams. You can't let your tackles just get double teamed on on whether it's zone or gap scheme. You've got to release those double teams.
When you get into the pass rush, though, with a guy like Joe Flacco, this is not Lamar, it's not Pat Mahomes. No. I mean, Joe Flacco's, where he's going to be, so you can be I don't know, a little more exotic, right? You don't have to worry about this guy snapping off a 25-yard run on you, so you can kind of overload and you can do some X stunts and that kind of stuff up front to get after him, and that's kind of what teams do, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, you don't have to control your pass rush. It's not one of those where you have to be, disciplined the way you think about discipline when you play the Mahomeses or the Lamars or those quarterbacks that, if they see a lane, they're gone. So yeah, you can do more with your rush. I assume that the rookie Concalvis is going to be a left tackle again for the Colts because I think Raymond's on IR, is he not?
No, they said Ryman passed concussion protocol. He is cleared.
Oh, okay. Then he'll play. But although I don't think he's he's obviously their left tackle, but I don't think he's a great left tackle. But that's, again, just my sense of tape study. But, he's their left tackle, so that means he'll be out there. But yeah, you can do a lot more. But the one thing you have to, with Flacco, say what you want, he will throw the football now. So you got to be really careful because he's going to push it down the field. He is not shy about driving that ball down the field. So, you don't want this to be one of those games where all of a sudden there's, 2 or 3 big plays and you feel like, wow, how did that happen?
And then with respect to the Colts offense, obviously they felt it necessary to put Flacco in to at least make the offense functional.
Right.
44% completion percentage from your quarterback is not going to help you win many games, so I get it. At the same time, though, Flacco has not lit the world on fire either. They haven't scored over 20 points in a month, and they didn't score an offensive touchdown last week. I realize they're playing a very good defense in Minnesota, but what do you think is plaguing them most from what you've seen on tape, Craig?
Well, last week, the pass game was not particularly good. I think overall, even with Jonathan Taylor, who's, just in terms of traits, a very good back, their run game has been really not what you would expect given Taylor. This is a team, and particularly with Flacco, because he's purely a pocket player, you have to be able to run the ball with commitment and sustaining consistency. Now, that doesn't mean Taylor's got to run for 180, but they've really struggled a bit to run the ball with meaningful consistency. I remember, and it was a few years ago, obviously the year they made the playoffs, and maybe that was a little bit of an aberration, but, it seemed that Taylor would get over 20 carries every week. They were able to really sustain their offense running the football. That's the way they have to play offense. It's really the only way they can play offense in order to be successful. And they've not really been able to do that. So, I don't know how they'll see it this week against the Bills. And obviously with Pittman out, Pierce will play. Mitchell, the rookie, will play. Downs is a really good slot receiver, and they move him around a bit. And as I said, Joe will throw the football, but they've not really had any sort of consistent feel to their offense. And it starts for them with the run game.
Let me ask you. I mean, it's hard to imagine two guys more different in their style of play than Joe Flacco and Anthony Richardson. So how's the coach? What's their coach? Who's calling the plays, and how different are they from one guy to the other? I mean, I know it's been 3 games for Flacco this season,
right?
But I mean, and maybe you touched on it throughout, your other answers. But what do you think the major differences are for these guys with Joe rather than Anthony?
Well, I think when Flacco's there, and again, I think Shane Steichen actually calls the plays, if I'm not mistaken. But I think you're going to the drop back section of your playbook, Steve, which you're not going to with Anthony Richardson, because Anthony Richardson at this point in his career is not a drop back quarterback. Everything with Anthony Richardson has to involve some kind of movement, some kind of run action, some kind of misdirection. With Joe Flacco, you are going to the drop back portion of your playbook. That's what your pass game is now. So now it's different for your O-line. People, I think, automatically assume these things are easy to do in the middle of a season. They're not, because now you're playing totally differently, with your O-line as well. It's not just the quarterback. It affects everybody in your offense. The routes are different. The O-line blocking is different. Everything about your offense is different because it's your drop-back pass game.
And then with respect to the Colts secondary, Greg, young on the outside, they've been somewhat victimized. The team as a whole is giving up a 70% completion rate. It's the 4th highest allowed in the league. The 2 safeties on the back end, and even Kenny Moore, who's a very good slot corner, they're all giving up opponent passer ratings of over 104. What is going on there? Are they just not marrying the pass rush with the pass defense?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. Cross is their strong safety, and he's much better closer to the line of scrimmage than in coverage. They're playing with, the Jones kid who started last year as a rookie, and I think he might this year have played every snap. He might have played 100% of their snaps. I did him coming out, and, obviously they view him as worthy of being a starter, but they have some guys who've been injured all year, too, that were drafted higher. I think Jones is a beatable corner, and Womack is now, after the early part of the season when they were rotating a lot at the corner spot opposite Jones in their nickel, Womack has seemingly won that job. He's a very beatable corner as well. So I think they're beatable in the pass game, which is going to make this game interesting from the Bills' perspective, because they're obviously missing Coleman. They could be missing Cooper. They don't really have, the guy you would think, okay, let's put this guy on the outside and he's going to go win. But that's a weakness of their defense because their front's pretty good. You got to be careful. We talked about Buckner. Latu, the rookie, is a very good pass rusher. And he's shown that this year. He's flashed on tape this year. And they move him around. Sometimes they use him as a joker where they stand him up and they move him around. So they can rush the quarterback. It's on the back end where they've really had a hard time.
Well, you look at this team. So they've struggled with Anthony Richardson under center. Now they've got Joe Flacco in there. They've got their defense is 26th in the NFL in yards allowed per game. Second worst rushing defense in the NFL. They allow almost 150 yards a game, and all 9 of their games are 1-score games.
Yeah.
That, to me, it doesn't make much. I mean, they're struggling so much in different areas of their team, but, man, nobody runs off and leaves them.
No, it's true. And that rushing number, I think you have to be careful about that because they do have good players up front. Hey, maybe the Bills come in and rush for 200 yards. Every game, you never know until it's played. But they have good players. I mean, there are 2 linebackers that play in the nickel. Franklin and Speed are really good players. I mean, Franklin is a tackling machine. He's a really nice player. But the thing about Gus Bradley's defense, and, Steve, Gus Bradley's been doing this for 100 years. He's one of those guys who believes he's not an exotic guy. He believes you line up, you do the same thing over and over, and this way your players feel super comfortable and they can play fast. That's his belief. And by the way, when you have young players like he has in the secondary, that belief holds even stronger. So he's not a guy you're necessarily going to see a lot of tactics from. They're going to line up and do what they do. There's no mystery to what Gus Bradley does on defense.
Right. Greg, thanks as always for the time and the insight. We appreciate it. We'll catch up with you next week.
All right, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks.